Greetings! I am Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire. Welcome to Friday. It's time to talk about Pathfinder. So, I wanted to start with the very basics of Pathfinder. It's a role-playing system, role-playing game. It's a D20 system. You're going to use the entire set of dice you have for this. D20 is your main one, but you're going to use them all. The world setting is called Galarian. You can look it up. Unfortunately, they don't talk about it in the base book, but there are a lot of resources online. And a major resource that means that you can use, that you don't even need to own the book to use this, is the psfrdd20.com. It's a website. It has an entire amount of information. It's like a Wikipedia of the Pathfinder role-playing game. It has all the basic information from pretty much every book that's came out. So when you're looking in there, you can find the information. Again, it's probably not as well organized as an actual book would be, but it's good enough that if you didn't own the book and you couldn't get the PDF of it, you could find information there. You can find the rules. You can find everything. It has every resource that every book would have, including ones your game master would use. So, Pathfinder. Now, talking about some terms in Pathfinder, they're basic terms. You take rounds in combat. You have to know things like CMD and CMB. They're combat maneuver defense and combat maneuver bonus. Those are numbers you're going to know. You're going to have to know about an armor class. Fortitude, reflex, will. I'm going to talk about all these. I'm going to go over them in sort of character creation. I'm going to go sort of from the top down for character creation, because there's some major decisions you have to make, and then you're going to start filling out your character sheet. And I'm going to explain what a lot of these things are when we fill out our character sheet. So, hey, this is going to be a couple-part series, so if there's still things you're questioning about, come to the next one. I'll record a few today and put up a few each time. It'll help you that if you're finding this for the first time, hopefully I'll have them all up. If not, you've jumped the gun a little bit, but that's okay. So today I wanted to start out with ability scores and race. These are the first two major decisions that you will make for your character for Pathfinder. Now there is still class too. Pathfinder has classes. I've mentioned what a class is before. It's a set of abilities. So the thing is, you want to sort of have an idea before you do these two things of your class too. Pathfinder has a large selection of classes. Now the ones in the core rulebook, there's around a dozen of them. And there's some good choices. If you're a beginner, I have a few suggestions. Beginners, avoid a lot of magic spells. That can be difficult. It can be frustrating too. If you want to do some magic spells, be a cleric. They're a little easier, a little less crazy on the abilities. They cast spells which heal people, which enhance people. My other suggestions for a basic character are fighter. It's what it is. It's a person that fights. And a rogue. Rogues stab from behind, they're thieves, they're acrobats, they're tricksters, they're spies, they're all that sort of roles. They use skill more than they use the sword. So if they have to get into combat, they know where weak points are. So that's the sort of characters that I would suggest for really basic. As much as I love playing wizards, you're going to have a little more trouble with them. So I'd stick to something like a cleric if you want to spellcast first. Again, it's a different type of spellcasting. You're not blowing people up really with big balls of fire and lightning and stuff, as with a wizard. But, I mean, if you're confident, you can still do it. It's entirely up to you what kind of character you want to play. So once you have an idea of the class you want to do, we should do ability scores. Now again, you might also want to look at what race you want to do, because races, they can get along better with certain classes. Granted, you can have any combination you want at all. it's your character to choose. But, like, for example, an elf makes a better wizard. It's true. Elf makes a better wizard, while a halfling makes a better rogue. These are facts because of the way the races are built. They get along better with these classes. I can still play that elvish barbarian all I want. It's an option. You can build your character however you want. So once you have these ideas, you can build your ability scores. And the thing is, you want to have these concepts ahead of time about what you're really going to sort of aim for, because in Pathfinder there's 6 ability scores: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. These 6 scores are what determine your character, and certain classes use these scores more than others. As a wizard, you don't need strength, but as that barbarian or that fighter, you do. Or maybe you're going to fight with a bow and arrow. You could be a fighter and do that. Then you need dexterity. I'll explain each of these ability scores and how you choose them and what the numbers mean. Let's go into that first. So, strength. It's your physical strength. It's your toughness. It's your ability to lift things. Dexterity is your manual dexterity, like how lithe you are, how flexible. Constitution is how hard your body is. Constitution is the big thing that affects your hit points. So, I should mention these. These are the 3 physicals. Strength affects how your damage with a melee weapon or handheld weapon is. So it's something that you're holding on to like a sword. That's a melee weapon. That's how it affects it. It affects how much you lift. It affects how you do things like climbing and swimming. Dexterity affects how well you can throw something or aim a bow. It affects how well you dodge out of the way of attacks. It also affects things like you need dexterity to pick locks or to sneak. Constitution affects how tough you can resist things like poisons and disease, and gives you more hit points. Now the 3 mental scores: intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Intelligence represents how smart you are, like book learning smart. That's an intelligence. It affects how many skills you've learned. In Pathfinder, there's a skill system. You get more skills for more intelligence, so maybe you want that. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe you need your character to be as dumb as a rock. Maybe you need them to be a super genius. That's intelligence. Wisdom. Wisdom is almost your inborn intelligence. It's similar. It's not. One is book learning. One is sort of an innate sort of intelligence. Wisdom affects how well you can resist abilities that affect your mind. It affects things like your ability to sense whether someone's lying or telling the truth. It affects also how well you can you can interpret your senses, like sight and hearing. Like if you can see very far away and hear very far away. Wisdom affects these. And then charisma. Charisma is not your physical attractiveness. It is not. It is how you express your personality. Whether you're likable or unlikable. I mean, you could be like this really beautiful person and be completely unlikable. It affects your social skills, like how diplomatic you are, or if you're tricky enough to lie to someone and get away with it. So these are these ability scores affect. So you can have a character that needs strength to be a really good fighter, let's say. A strength-based fighter needs strength. You can still have high ability scores how you want them. Now, the average ability score for a human in Pathfinder is 10, down the line. If you have all 10s, you're completely average. I'm going to explain how ability scores work, but let's choose them now. You're not going to have average. You, as whatever hero you are, you're going to have more than average. So there's a couple of systems that are in place to choose ability scores. I'm going to talk about the classics, which are unused more nowadays, and the one that's preferred for Pathfinder last. Because let's start the way that these are artifacts from other D20 systems. So there's the rolling types of systems. Now the rolling systems, they've changed over the years. There's various types of rolling. What it entails, though, is you take 6-sided die. The basic rolling system is you take 3d6, you roll them, you add the number together, and you go down the line, one from strength all the way to charisma on your sheet, and you write those numbers in. That can be terrible. That's a system which is really debunked. And if your GM has you do that, he's kind of mean, because the characters can be so different. Now, there's other systems based on this. Maybe you roll 4 dice and get rid of the lowest one. 5 dice, get rid of the lowest one. Maybe you roll these dice, and then you can arrange the scores how you want, rather than just down the line. These have always been options for the dice rolling system. And I liked playing with that for many years. But Pathfinder has a very nice system that they put in place, which I think is better. A point-buy system, it's called. Now what it is you're assumed to have no scores whatsoever to begin with. And your GM comes up to you and will tell you how many points you have to use. Now, this ranges from 10 to 25, depending on how they give a rating in the book about what these mean. Like 15 is standard, 20 is heroic, 25 is epic, and 10 is low. Like, they're called fantasy games, that like the standard fantasy game you'd have 15 points. If you're very heroic characters, you'd have 20. If you're like the epic heroes from like Lord of the Rings, you'd have 25. Think of it that way. Or if you're just more average Joes that have gotten into a heroic situation, you might have 10. So, let's go for 20. 20 is one of my favorite numbers to do. It's the one I usually do for a lot of my games. Heroic. You're not like epic characters, but you're heroes. Now, these points tell you how much you have to spend to buy ability scores. Certain ability scores have a value associated with them that tells you how many points you have to spend on them. 10 costs you 0 because it's average. That's the starting point, 10. Now, a big thing to note, which is very important, you can buy less than 10. A 9 they give you points. If you go below average in something, you can get extra points. I would not suggest this for a first character. Having a deficiency is tough. I mean, all characters can get into situations where you need it. Just because you're the big barbarian that's stupid and ugly and has no tact, doesn't mean you're going to get into a circumstance where maybe you have to help solve a puzzle, or maybe you have to talk to that guy. And if you have a penalty, it might not end well. So, point buy. 9 will give you an extra point. 8 will give you 2 extra points. And 7 will get you 4 extra points. I'm going to explain why a little later when I talk about these ability scores after we've chosen them, but that's what you have to think about. 4 extra points is a lot. It's very good. But you might not want it. Alright, now, when choosing these points, you don't necessarily need to, but I would suggest aiming for even numbers. Even numbers are best, but you might not always end up with even numbers, and I'll explain why in a minute and how you figure these points out. But 1 point will get you an 11, 2 points gets you a 12, 3 points buys a 13 in a score. 5 points buys a 14. 7 points buys a 15. 10 points buys you a 16. 13 points buys you a 17. And 17 points buys you an 18. 18 is the highest you can buy. It's expensive. You're probably not going to buy more than 118 in a game. If you do, you might have to take negatives to buy it also, especially if you want some other ability scores. Let's say, for example, in my gambit here of the character I'm creating, I choose to have 2 16s, 10 points each. and the rest are going to be 10s. Now, what do these actually mean for a lot of my numbers? Now, this is a big concept in ability scores I'm going to have to explain. Every ability score has a modifier. This modifier is the number you add in across your character sheet when it asks you to add in your intelligence to something. You don't add in the score, you add in the modifier. When it asks you to add your dexterity, it's the same way. You add your modifier. So the way to figure out a modifier, it's actually really easy. It involves a little math, but again, it's only adding and subtracting, so it's not difficult. You take your ability score, you subtract 10 from it. Okay. We're going to talk about negatives in a second because that's a little trickier. But let's say you don't have any negatives. Subtract 10 from it. What's that number? That's still not your modifier. You divide it in half. Okay, I lied a little bit. There's a little bit of division, 2. So if I had a 14, my modifier is 2. If I had a 13, oh, that's a little tricky. Your modifier would be 1. Because you're using a little rounding too. You round down. Unless it says, you round down. So an 11 would be 0, 12, 13, 1, 14, 15 is 2, 16, 17 is 3, 18 is 4. Negatives, you sort of have to think of the opposite. That you're still rounding down. So, oh, I have 9. I have negative 1. Divided in half is 1, is half of a negative. Point. You round down. Negative 1 for a 9. Negative 1 for an 8. Negative 2 for a 7. Now, there are ways to go below 7. We'll talk about those. But you're not going to choose to go below 7 just by your ability scores you're choosing. You can get down to 5, which is negative 3. Ouch. You probably don't want to start with that. Not at all. Alright. So now we have our modifiers. We have our ability scores. So, let's talk about race. Because this is not going to be as big a section, and I'll go into more detail in the races. But what the races do, the first and most foremost, is they give an enhancement to your ability scores. Now, in Pathfinder, there's a couple of races, one being example human, which just say, put +2 to any ability score. This doesn't cost you any points. That means, oh, I had this 16 here? It's an 18 now. Didn't cost me any points. I put this 2, which is my human racial bonus, into it. There are a lot of races that don't actually tell you exactly what you put into. Let's use the elf, for example. The elf says, I get +2 dexterity, I get +2 intelligence, I get -2 constitution. Most of the races are like this. They get 2 ability scores a bonus and 1 a penalty. Hence why you can have 5. Because you could have a penalty that matches your 7. And then be in a lot of trouble. You don't want a 5. It's going to be hard to play. It may or may not be fun. Depending on how you build, what character you want to build. Alright. So races. Now we know that they give ability scores. What else do they do? Races will tell you how old you are. It'll give us examples of names. You can always come up with your own. It'll give examples of how tall you are, how much you weigh. It gives us sort of information. It also gives a bit special abilities. Each race has their own unique little abilities which define the race. And they all share. Now, Pathfinder is very custom. I will say that. Don't go for the customization to begin with. That's one of the things I'm going to say I prefer for you as a starting character to use the core book instead of the website. The website talks about the options, the alternate options. They're good, they are good, and they add a new level. But it can be confusing. So now we've chosen our ability scores, we've chosen our race, we're ready to move on to the next step, which we'll talk about next time. So, as always, until next time, I bid you farewell.